Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu Flow, dem Podcast für dein erfülltes, freies und sicheres Leben als Frau. Mein Name ist Svenja Kasa und ich bin Host und Gastgeberin dieses Podcasts, mit dem ich dir Impulse, Tools und ganz viel Empowerment rund um dein Leben als Frau und für deinen weiblichen Alltag reichen möchte. Ich freue mich ganz besonders, denn heute in der Folge habe ich mal wieder eine Gästin und führe einen Flow-Talk für dich. Und meine Gesprächspartnerin heute ist eine ganz wundervolle, ganz inspirierende Frau, mit der ich vor allem auch durch Breathwork in Kontakt gekommen bin, mit der ich darüber ganz viel zu tun hatte. Und es handelt sich dabei um Sujeewa Jaya. Und Sujeewa ist Breathwork Facilitator und Embodiment Coach. Und sie hat letztes Jahr bei Breathing Space die Ausbildung zum Breathwork Coach gemacht. Und Breathing Space ist ja die Breathwork-Schule, bei der auch ich meine Ausbildung gemacht habe, mit der ich jetzt zusammenarbeite und auch die deutsche Ausbildung anbiete. Und ja, ich freue mich unglaublich dolle über dieses Gespräch, was wir geführt haben, weil wir ganz viele verschiedene Themen angefasst haben. Wir sprechen natürlich über Sujeewa selbst, über ihr Leben, über ihre Arbeit. Wir reden darüber, wie sie zum Breathwork gekommen ist, was der Atem für sie bedeutet und vor allem auch, wie sich ihre Beziehung zu ihrem Atem verändert hat, auch seit der Ausbildung. Und wir sprechen über ein Projekt, an dem Sujeewa mitarbeitet und wo sie geholfen hat, es mit ins Leben zu rufen, und zwar über das Forest Garden Projekt. Und da geht es um dekoloniale Heilung. Ich werde noch nicht zu viel sagen, aber das Thema liegt quasi auf der Entkolonisierung der Welt, aber vor allem auch der Fokus liegt auf der Wellness-Industrie, in der ich ja mit Breathwork auch tätig bin. Und wir sprechen darüber, warum es für uns alle als Individuen, aber auch als Industrie und als Gesellschaft wichtig ist, sich mit dem Thema Kolonialisierung auseinanderzusetzen und auch warum es noch viel, viel wichtiger ist, auch daran zu arbeiten, unser System zu dekolonisieren, in dem wir leben. Und Kolonialismus ist meines Verständnisses nach der Grundstein für einige der gesellschaftlichen Probleme, die wir haben heute. Es ist der Grundstein für Kapitalismus, Sexismus, Frauenfeindlichkeit, Rassismus und Homophobie und ist deswegen etwas, womit wir uns meiner Meinung nach noch viel, viel mehr auseinandersetzen dürfen, wo noch viel, viel mehr Bewusstheit für kreiert werden dürfen. Und in dem Gespräch mit Sujeewa heute möchte ich quasi den Grundstein für auch diese Community und für meine Community legen und dieses Thema einfach nochmal mehr ins Licht rücken und ein bisschen Aufmerksamkeit drauf schenken. Und wir nutzen diese Unterhaltung wirklich als Startpunkt und als Einladung, dann noch tiefer zu gehen. Und ich fand es super inspirierend, ich fand es super interessant, was Sujeewa zu erzählen hatte und was sie uns mitgegeben hat. Und hoffe, dass auch du für dich aus dem Gespräch einiges mitnehmen kannst. Das Gespräch ist in Englisch geführt. Sujeewa lebt in Südafrika, kommt ursprünglich aus den Niederlanden und genau deswegen haben wir auf Englisch gesprochen. Und ich denke und hoffe und glaube, dass das vom Verständnis her okay sein sollte. Wenn du mehr über Sujeewa erfahren möchtest, findest du die Links in den Shownotes. Und ich freue mich auf jeden Fall jetzt ganz doll, wenn du dran bleibst und wenn du dieses Gespräch anhörst. Und bevor wir in das Gespräch starten, werde ich auch noch mal einen ganz kleinen Intro-Teil auf Englisch anbieten, um die ZuhörerInnen, die die Podcast-Folge holen, die aber gar nicht deutsche Muttersprachler sind oder Deutsch sprechen, um die auch mit abzuholen und willkommen zu heißen. Und dann geht es in ein paar Sekunden mit dem Gespräch los und ich freue mich auf jeden Fall, wenn du dran bleibst. So welcome everybody to the Female Flow podcast. My name is Svenja. If you have never heard of me, I'm really excited that you are joining us today and that you're listening into this amazing podcast interview that I've done with a beautiful, very inspiring, amazing woman and a dear colleague of mine. Her name is Sujeewa Jaya. She's breathwork facilitator and embodiment coach. And Sujeewa and I have spoken obviously about her and her life and her work, and she will talk a little bit about how she found her way to breath work, what her breath means to her, and how her relationship to her breath and with her breath has changed over the years. And then we will also speak about an amazing project that she is working on with some other people. It's called the Forest Garden, and it's about decolonial healing. So it's quite an interesting, but even more, it's a really important topic, I feel, and that's why I'm quite happy that we started this conversation. And it really is only a starting point, our conversation, and we hope that we are able to invite you to, after our conversation, go deeper into learning more about decolonization, about looking into why it's important for us as individuals, as society, but also for the world to, step by step decolonize our system and our world. And you will find more information about the Forest Garden project that we're going to speak about in the show notes. There will also be the information how to find Sujeewa and her work. And yes, as I said, I'm really excited about having this conversation with her. Without further ado, I will start the interview and let you listen in to what we've spoken about. So please enjoy. So welcome, Sujeewa. It's a pleasure to have you on my podcast here. I'm really excited. And we just had a laugh because I didn't know how to start the interview in English, because normally we do interviews in German. But I'm really, really, as I said, excited to have you here and to speak to you today. And before we do anything else, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing in life, and maybe what's important to know about you?
Yes, of course. So my name is Sujeewa. My name is also Rihanna. I think that's how we got to know each other. First of all, thank you for having me here and for having this conversation with me. So a little bit about me. I am a breathworker, breathwork facilitator, embodiment coach. That's kind of where I'm currently focused my work on. And besides that, I am a fond hiker. I enjoy cycling in nature, preferably mountain biking. And yeah, how do you say that? Like a learner of life, I would say. Yeah, that's what I would go for.
Tell us where you live at the moment.
Yeah, so I live in Cape Town,
Mhm.
and I've been here for about 10 years. Before that, I lived in Amsterdam, grew up in Amsterdam, heritage lineage in Sri Lanka.
And what didn't make you go to Cape Town? How did you end up in South Africa?
That had to do with me doing a postgrad studies, actually. So I was living and working in Amsterdam. I had my recruitment agency, and I felt like it was time to expand and kind of my horizons and go more deeper into into my interest, which at that time was very much focused on the social and the social systems and inclusion and migration and wanting to also live elsewhere and in a country, I would say, in the global south. And so I found a great program at the university here in Cape Town, and that's where I found myself and still find myself after 10 years. Yeah, so but that's how I initially got here, which was kind of like a 1 year or 2 year plan. Now 10 years later.
I love that. How did you, like, not just locally, but also in a developmental way and in a like mental way, but how did you come from where you were, like where you are now? Like, how did you become a breathwork and embodiment coach? If you want to share a bit about your story too, I think people would love to hear that.
Yeah. So it has always been kind of like a personal journey, at least for me, what I go through, like personally, and kind of unfolding and getting to know myself more intimately. with that also kind of the professional, or like the way that we practice our professional lives is changing with that as well. So it has really been, I think the easiest way to describe it, it has really been kind of like a movement from whereby the human or people were at its center, let's say, in all the works that I've done so far. But it has kind of moved from, entrepreneur to social entrepreneur, and I would say now, kind of like soulpreneur, let's say, in the sense of it feels more closer and closer to home. And with home, I mean, my body and my soul. And that had led me to breath work. And really, because breath work for me works at the intersection of the body, our spirit, and kind of the humanness that we bring into it. And breath is something that is really accessible to all of us, although we're not always conscious of it. But, we have it, so to speak, quote unquote. we can work with our breath, and befriend it.
Yeah.
So what led me to breathwork itself, like personally, is breathwork, or at least my breath, has been really a way to ground and to center, even though I was not at the time necessarily aware that it was through breath. Right? Because sometimes we do certain things, or we add certain kind of like rituals to our either daily or weekly practices. And then only in hindsight, it's like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, it's because I was, becoming more and more aware of my breath, or I was working with my breath in different ways than I used to. Yeah, so it wasn't like necessarily, oh, I've done a breath work, I've done a conscious connected breath work, and then like.
Do you remember
This,
what was the moment or the point or the practice that also made you start changing your breath work, even though it was, or your breath, even though it wasn't consciously yet? Do you remember what happened that changed that, or did it really just happen naturally and you can't remember why all of a sudden you used your breath?
yeah, there's several points that one of the thing, and I know it's it's different in a way, but like meditation,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense that when paying attention to our breath during meditation,
Yeah.
that can help. Like meditation doesn't necessarily mean that we pay attention, to
Yeah.
our breath. And especially at a time where I was experiencing panic attacks.
Mm.
And with panic attacks, I noticed there was a certain cycle of where I was going, what I was going through in terms of like, mentally, emotionally, physically. And the breath at that point can then either be your friend or like your stranger, that you're really not familiar with. I wouldn't say enemy, I would say stranger, just because, it's not necessarily an enemy. Yeah, so that was one of the moments that I really became aware of my breath and how I could work with my breath. But then at the same time, if it would be too intense, that it's actually also something that I really would not want to focus on, because it it would just lead to more, anxiety.
Yeah.
But I guess that was one of the moments. Then later, it also came through in terms of, well, exercising in general, how we use our breath and how we can use our breath to kind of like regulate our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But again, not necessarily something that I was super conscious of. It was just something I was doing and that I noticed. And, then again, later on, it was something when I also like pranayama
Mm-hmm.
exercises, and then only years later again actual like the breathwork training came back into vision, and I was like, oh right, yes, this is really kind of what assists, with staying grounded, becoming grounded and centered. And so it's more so in hindsight, I would say, than necessarily like a once-off breathwork session. Yeah. But it has been there.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because for me it was basically the opposite. It was like, ooh, there's a workshop called Breathwork. I have no idea what's happening there. I just walk there and then I discover Breathwork. But it's quite interesting to like just a couple of things that I noticed while you were talking. Is also like how you said exactly that, how like for example, meditation can be a tool in which you become more aware, but not necessarily needs to, but it can happen. And how you unconsciously started using your breath in different or realized there is a connection with your breath and your well-being. And I think that's just quite interesting how different ways lead to a certain realization or a certain awareness in regards to how powerful our breath can be. So do you remember when you became aware of it? Do you remember when it started actually, oh, I'm actually using my breath and this is what's happening? Do you know when that happened and when it put you on the, okay, I want to know more about this breath thing and about breath work? Do you know when that happened and how that came along?
Oh, it would be those. I think it's several moments. One of them is really like I was doing a program with the Art of Living. I don't know if you've heard of that organization.
I
And
think so. I couldn't put a finger on it what they are doing, but it sounds familiar. Do you want to go into that and tell us about it?
yeah, so it's I think it's an international organization, kind of with its foundations. I think in India, but also here in Cape Town in South Africa. There's several like centers or different ways of kind of being involved or engaging with that. And one of the things is meditation. There's silent retreats, there's satsang, which is more kind of chanting and singing, and also pranayama, which is one of the activities that's incorporated in that as well. And so definitely when I use that on a daily basis, like not necessarily going into the center and doing pranayama there, but just when I integrated that into my daily practice, that really was a moment of like, this is very, very powerful. This is something that really grounds me and centers me, and for me very much is a way to, like yoga can be, in a sense of like we're preparing the body to now go into meditation or into a meditative state, right, into stillness with all its kind of sounds that are going, right, not necessarily stillness, there is nothing happening, but yeah, so that was definitely a realization with that. Other ways very much is actually very basic in terms of when we are working, or when I was working in an office, still like 9 to 5 job, and it was those moments where you really just need to take a breath, and to when you either feel overwhelmed or there's work pressures or whatever it is, to really just, even if it's just taking 3 breaths, or 5 breaths, to really kind of not necessarily recalibrate, because I feel that we need more than 5 breaths, but to kind of really feel into how your body feels in that moment. And especially in those moments, at least for me, that my breath at times is like really high up in the chest.
Yeah.
When noticing that, and when it's so high up in the chest, that actually I'm really not in the most kind of like rested state.
Yeah.
Right. It's really coming from that go, go, go type of energy, which at some points we need, but there's also moments that we can kind of like need to take a few breaths to go back, in breathing into our bellies, and using that energy. So it's been different, moments, I would say.
Okay. And then you decided at some point to do a breathwork facilitator course, become a facilitator yourself. And that's basically how we met, because that's like you did train with Breathing Space, which is the breathwork school where I teach, you went on the apprenticeship where I became your mentor, and I wonder if you want to share a bit about your personal journey on that. Like, it's not so much about the course itself, but if you just want to speak a little bit about what you experienced, how your experience, and maybe also your relationship with your breath changed. And
Yeah, definitely my relationship with my breath changed. I would say it deepened more and more. It actually opened up like this whole field of breath work, right? It's like there's so much in there that I'm still kind of like delving into and exploring.
yeah,
So it's really kind of like that first layer, like the tip of the iceberg, let's say. Yeah, so in that sense, the beginning of something, yeah, more and more. And the breathwork facilitation for me has definitely been not only about breathwork, but very much to stepping into that role of, or not necessarily role, but like into facilitation and into that space holding and into that the doing. That has really kind of that were my main three. So I would say the breath work itself, like, my relationship with the breath, the space holding, and that facilitation. And really that affirmation, I would say, of we're doing this already.
yeah,
We're doing this already in our daily lives, in various aspects of our lives. Maybe I was just not that aware of it, and this brought it more to the forefront, and to really step into that.
I love that. And it really resonates with me what you said about the breathwork course was really just the beginning of the journey, and like it deepened the relationship, but also, and I realized that like I'm, as I said, I discovered breathwork in a workshop, like properly, and haven't done lots before. And I've done meditation before, but I never really connected, as you said, the dots to breathing. Really, it was more like clear your mind. Come on, let's get the head empty.
Right.
When breathwork came, and like it's like 4.5 years ago now but it still feels like I'm at the beginning. I feel like now that I'm teaching breathwork, it feels like I'm learning more and more, just because I wanna be knowledgeable also, but also
Yeah.
my own personal journey has changed so much again, and I'm learning so much. So yeah, it's such a breathwork course, however long or deep it is, it's really just a beginning. And then something I just remember what you said earlier in regards to how when you started using your breath, how it also, like, because it connected you to yourself, but it also made it feeling more, I think you said intense in regards to, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Like how we feel like we want to connect with each other, and then we find a tool, and then all of a sudden there's this original weight when we connect with ourselves. That's not, maybe not the original, like the pleasant experience we imagined it to be at the beginning, because there's so much that we have maybe ignored in the past or that we weren't aware of. That was basically my experience in regards to, okay, there's a really powerful tool that can connect me with myself, but that's also really scary because there's lots of shit in my body that I haven't paid attention to and inside of me.
Yeah, 100%, in the sense that it's like not being connected
Mhm.
with your body. So for me, very much like not being in connection with my body, and especially kind of the desensitization from it, and to kind of come back to that aliveness of the body with everything that it holds, right? Which is really also the uncomfortable shit
Yeah.
that's there, and it really kind of like needs to be excavated and kind of, well, breathed into,
Yeah.
and to be with that. But with that also comes really that kind of like befriending of your body. But then with initially, it kind of like it's a stranger.
Yeah.
and I say it's just because it's really in that moment. It can be it can be not, mine, because it's so not connected in that way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense in regards to what you said. And you mentioned that earlier when you spoke about your panic attacks in regards to how it can be your friend, it can support you. But also, if you are not aware of it, like obviously the breath is something with panic attacks that can go totally out of control and just push you deeper. So I love how you say how it can play out differently as a friend or a stranger. And I like how you say it's not really an enemy, but more a stranger if you're not aware of it and if you don't use it as a support for yourself. So that quite relates with me. Thank you for sharing that. You want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at the moment, the projects you're working on, the work you're doing. I know there's a lot going on in your life.
Yes. So I'm doing breath work, individual and group sessions, as well with embodied coaching, which also involves or integrates breath work, and where I focus there, on alignment and on anchoring and on alchemizing. That's the framework that I use, so to speak.
How did you come up with those words? I love that. And I know I've seen them on your website and everything. How did that happen and what do they stand for?
With that, like how I feel how I work it's right, like we are unearthing something that needs to be unearthed, right? That needs to emerge. And then we embody. Mm-hmm. And from that kind of embodiment and that kind of integration, we're able to use those new, learnings and those insights and gifts, I would say, and really alchemize that and just to kind of share that. And so that alignment really kind of stands for how are we in this moment, what is, I would say, out of resonance, right? What is out of alignment, or what is already in alignment, but we would like to deepen that alignment. And with all the different aspects and dimensions, like as a multi-dimensional being, there's many things, right, that make us who we are. Yeah, so that's where the alignment kind of comes in. And really in a way of, we might have desires, but how does our body feel, right, when we say these desires out loud or when we write them down? And just in a very materialistic way, I might have the desire to have a 6-figure income, right? But how does my body actually respond to that?
Can you go a bit deeper into it? Because I feel like I know what you mean, because like it's a good example and I do resonate with that example. But some people might wonder what you mean, because like the superficial answer could be, well, my body would feel great, obviously, if I have a 6-figure income. But I assume you are heading in a different direction with that.
Right. Yeah. Because we might think, yes, I invite that. I welcome that in. I feel lots of the time that's kind of perhaps our mind talking, perhaps a little bit in combination, with our wants and our needs, which are kind of, again, also different from our desires. Would you really take a, breath, take 3 breaths, become aware of your, sensations in the body, and then bring that invitation in. So bring in, and I'm mentioning this example of 6-figure income. How does that feel in your body? Like our initial response might be, oh, that might feel great, but perhaps there's a contraction happening, maybe in certain parts. Maybe it's not necessarily, a contraction in terms of cleansing your jaws or some tension in your belly or wherever it may be. Maybe it can be a temperature change. Maybe your body responds with a whole other, sensation. And it's really paying attention to that, because mentally we might feel like, yes, that's where I wanted to go to. And yes, you really would like to. And at the same and simultaneously, your body is indicating like, I'm not yet really completely orientated towards that, and let's explore that, and kind of like going in it, like exploring that is also kind of like bringing our body into the conversation rather than only goal orientated, like, oh, what can we do, to get there. I'm not saying that that's not necessary, that's not welcome, but that's, it's more of really bringing the body into it. So that's why I kind of refer to it as embodied coaching.
Yeah, and I totally love that, and I agree with that, because often we think we've got an idea of what we want and what our desires are, as you said, like the money example is really good, but then our body might have like other feelings, memories, maybe at some point, like just thinking about what my body is used to, it's like not having this confidence or safety feeling, even in regards to that it's okay to have that much money, because that's not what I've learned. Like my system really feels comfortable in not having any money at all, because that's how I was brought up. And so there might be something in my body that prevents me going or being really open. Another example I could think about is like lots of people saying like, I really want a deep connected relationship with a partner, but then like my body is also saying like, I'm really afraid of someone really hurting me. So that might prevent me from really be open to this deep, loving, connected partnership I, on the superficial, are looking for. And then I also feel like there's a lot of society and what society expects us as people. Like you can't not go for six figure if you own your own business, or you can't not want a relationship, because that's just what happiness means in the society you live in. So I feel like there's so much more than just, oh, I have a desire, and the initial reaction is, yep, that's it. And if you go deeper, is exactly as you said, you discover like there might be more to it than just this desire, and there might be things that we need to work through, feel, embody before we really can go for that desire. Or it might also change in the middle of it. Like if you're really working with what you want, it might, like the six-figure income might change, and it doesn't have to be six-figure anymore at some point, because you realize it's never been your own true personal desire.
Yeah, and I'm smiling because I'm like, yes, absolutely, and thank you for bringing that in. It's really, using the body as an exploration into that kind of questioning, or into that desire, and also like that you bring in, like indeed like the societal kind of conditioning, and with that, with your example of receiving, either it be love or money or intimacy, pleasure, joy, that how that sits within our body, and how we have stories that we are wearing, right, as a cloak, let's say. And how these stories are also from generation to generation to generation to generation, and that these stories also happen, or have happened, like within a social, cultural, and historical context.
I feel like that's you're basically inviting in my next question about one of the projects you are working on the moment. And I know I said I do want to talk about it, so I'm jumping on it, and I'm going to ask you about the forest garden that is one of the projects you're also working on. Do you like talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the forest garden is an initiative that is focused on embodied decolonial healing, in short, and an embodied approach in that sense of it, in our personal, how colonialism breathes through us, personally, but also collectively and professionally. Yeah, so it's really an invitation to explore how colonization, lives inside our bodies, and how we can unlearn that, and how we can learn new ways, and how we can do that by excavating those things and unearthing those things within us, but also within, community, and within, a communal space. We have opened our doors in last month in April. So that's like really exciting. And it's really an invitation to, as I, was talking about with embodied coaching, it's an invitation to bring our bodies into this work, right? To bring our bodies into the conversation.
I would love to hear more about that. Also, in regards to why do you feel that is needed today in our world, and maybe also a little bit about what's the background and the base of it. What's the underlying assumptions or the underlying thoughts that are there when Forest Garden was created and when the project was started?
So it's really coming from a approach of loving justice, I would say. And so how within our bodies, personally and as a collective, we carry the trauma that decolonization has inflicted upon us.
Yeah.
It's really a way of delving into that, in the sense that this is something that we all carry, right? And we all have that, well, I believe, that sense of responsibility to kind of tend to that in a way that it belongs to all of us. That it seeps into how our society is set up. And of course, within, specific context. So for example, Germany, different history, different specifics. So it might play out different compared to South Africa, for example. But in a way that the colonial project has really kind of seeps in through, the structures and the systems, and still does, right? With regards to supremacy, like white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and how that is really kind of like how that's breathed into us, and how we still breathe that every day, and how that also is different, of course, for different bodies, right? How that's different for white bodies, how that's different for brown bodies, or how that's different for black bodies. Like we all carry that in other ways. And I feel that it's really time that all of us are working with that, and that it's not only something that's exempt, white bodies, because it lives in all of us, and it's that kind of like historical and social, and how that sits, intergenerational, and how that sits in our bodies and in our cultures and in the social and in the familial.
We touched that in like our conversation before we started the recording, but I find that such an important topic, because me speaking as a white woman, I'm aware that most of the time I'm not aware of a lot when it comes to white supremacy and colonization, decolonization. I feel like, especially in the bubble we are in the wellness industry, in the spiritual bubble, I think I've never been as aware as I was now, obviously, but also like the last 2 years since the topic of, for example, racism came up in the media more, that started my awareness, but then also working in breathwork, and not even originally, because originally when it all started, there wasn't much like open discussions around that. So it only feels like, for me personally, the awareness came in the last couple of months with the media also starting, but me also like following more diverse, for example, Instagram accounts where those topics are more addressed. And now I feel like the forest garden, we spoke about that earlier. I signed up a couple of weeks ago just to start reading through it and learning through it. And while I'm reading about it, my main takeaway at the moment is I'm not aware of much. I feel like I get a sense of where we are going and what happened in the past and how it's affected us, but I still feel like lots of thoughts I have and lots of things I create are without the awareness of how my society, how our history, how the like generational trauma and history has shaped me. And I feel like for example, capitalism is a good point because I'm quite aware of that, but I feel like it's still a very wide-bodied approach how I look at that and how I criticize that. And so I feel like there's still so much to learn. So I think what I want to say is that I appreciate the Forest Garden and the work you guys are doing, and also I see the necessity because I see how much I'm not aware of and how much other people are not aware of.
Mm.
Maybe we can speak a little bit about what you notice, and how, like, if you want to talk about that, how you see maybe the development, but also the need for more of that work in the last couple of years, but also for the future.
Yes. Oh, I would love to kind of like add on to what you just shared, and then we can come back to your question if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
Because there was some that came through. Yeah, that it's coming into awareness, that it's coming kind of like it's been orbiting around you and it's coming into your awareness through in different ways. Yeah. And I guess kind of like as a potential, you know, I don't know if it's a starting point, it's just a point or a turning point. I don't know what kind of point, but is that it's really kind of affecting the collective well-being. And so, not only the collective well-being, and that kind of like seeps through your personal well-being. And of course, with collective well-being, there's a difference how that will affect white bodies or how that will affect bodies of color. With that, there's a certain level of awareness that we can do when we delve into these things, as you were saying, like following certain accounts or podcasts episodes, and all these these things, and to kind of feel that through. But then there's this other side of really going into your own lineages. I've been within that historical context, because I feel and also taking that in like the wellness space into consideration, or even kind of like the trainings that are out there that definitely focus on trauma. But oftentimes it's also in a very personalized way. And yes, there is trauma that we personally have to kind of like integrate, right? And work through and work with. However, it doesn't only sit within our personal kind of environment, because it sits within a larger, wider, complex, multidimensional environment. And so it's really kind of like bringing that in, and from that bringing the body into that conversation, and feeling that through, and how the internalized ways how colonialism kind of shows up and breathes through us, and to indeed learning, but a lot of unlearning in that as well, and yeah, bringing that into our awareness, which might look different for you than it looks for me.
Yeah.
And in your journey and in my journey.
Yeah. Do you have an example where you think, like when you just said about how you spoke about colonial healing and how it affects us, our lineage, but also like how it shows up in our society today. Do you have an example where I feel like you touched a little bit on it in regards to the healing industry and how it's still very focused on individualism. But do you want to go a bit deeper and speak about like how can it affect us and what do we see today in our societies because having enough awareness around that?
I could give you an example which speaks more so to yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we go into the wellness, when we use yoga.
Yeah.
Sorry, talking about wellness. It has been something that has been taken out of context, rebranded, repackaged, and then kind of sold, right? And it's kind of like sold back to where it's even kind of taken from, or where it's got its inspiration from. And so, well, it has been part of cultures, right? Where it has been part of the various ways in which we integrate and incorporate into our lives, or into our spiritual lives, and how we, into our being, let's say. Does that make sense? Sorry, where I'm going.
It does.
I'm not sure if that's a good explanation. Yeah, it's one of the ways how that could, show up. Yeah, I'll think of another example as we go, because maybe there's actually a clearer one that I can kind of like bring in.
Maybe just to repeat and see if I got the example you used in regards to yoga. So obviously yoga is deeply rooted in the, like my understanding, in the Indian culture, and has like thousands of years of tradition. And I'm not a yoga teacher, I've never trained anything, and the main part I do is basically attending a yoga session now and then, maybe watching a video on YouTube. So but my understanding of yoga is that there's much more to it than pranayama exercises and asanas. But what happened in the last couple of decades is basically it's been taken out of context, out of its culture, and brought into our society. And like, not want to say it's not helpful for many people, because I feel like that it is. But the problem with that is that it's been like exactly taken out of the context and then put into a quite capitalistic environment, like selling it as a healing solution, but also not appreciating the origins and where it's coming from, and that there's more to it than just a solution you can buy for like people who are really stressed because of our society, because of the way capitalism is structured, and colonization has made the world be structured. Is that
yeah, exactly. And then with that, indeed, it's kind of like selling it back, and having created like alliances, or boards that now certify people that, okay, yeah, you have had well enough training. Not to say that we don't need training, but it's kind of more the way in which
a thought that came up just in the last couple of weeks after reading some of the articles from the Forest Garden website. And by the way, for everybody listening, I will like link the Forest Garden and everything we've spoken about in the show notes. But one of the things in that I think goes hand in hand with what we were just speaking about is how our society and how our world today, and the wellness industry is often basically placing itself in the middle of a capitalistic structure where the offers we have like are meant to do good, but and heal or make us feel better, or like strengthen our personal self-care. And I'm pretty sure most of the people who offer healing offers are doing that from a good intention, but also often the goal with that is to get us back on track, or get us back like to become more productive, to fit back into our society, to deliver more. So often people, like when we come back to the yoga, I feel like often people are saying like, I need a yoga session to relax because my daily life is so busy and I'm so stressed, but like not looking at the bigger picture in regards to why are we actually stressed? Why are we actually like always trying to deliver more and be more productive, and just using now yoga as an example to fill up our cup, but then go back into this really dysfunctional structure we've got in our world at the moment, which is also like not really resourceful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going into this, into a conversation of really building something new, right? Something different, where it's not sustainable. It has never, okay, so this is the thing. It has never been sustainable.
Yeah.
We have been believed, like in our perception or that it is sustainable, but it is not. Like it's not, contributing to our well-being, like as a collective, on a personal level. It is indeed kind of like tending to the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it is. And then when the symptoms are gone, okay, then it's fine. But the actual, kind of that underlying
The original
simmering is still there. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we could paint a picture of what would be more like a sustainable but also like really healing way, like if you look at if the work we start doing now and we need to do because, as you said, it's not sustainable and that we are like hurting us as individuals, as societies, and like the planet Earth in itself, what do you think needs to change and where do we need to go?
That's a big question. I can tell you this, that there's no one solution. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
And there's no, one way of going about that. How I feel about it now is that one of the ways is really to pay attention, to kind of go into that conversations, like with ourselves and, communally or within a community, to kind of excavate that more and explore that, and to be able to be with that discomfort, to sit with kind of that discomfort, but also the way in which our nervous system responds to that, right? Because we might not have kind of worked with that muscle before, so it kind of needs that stretching and flexing and strengthening to be able to go into that, like with ourselves and in groups, to to be with that kind of responses that might be, I freeze, I fight, I flight, and to kind of become aware of it, and to then be able to move with that. And sit with that and to reflect on that. That's more of an invitation, because that is really kind of that, shadow work, that root work.
Yeah.
Because I feel that's like a process, it's an ongoing process. It's not something, there's a start and now there's an end, I'm kind of like woke, whatever that may mean, it's not in that way. It's really kind of like an ongoing learning and unlearning, and also, as you're saying, like building, right? Like how are we building, how are we creating, and I feel that the creation will be done in different ways. It will be less in, or it might be more in terms of less of an accumulation, right? An accumulation of wealth that just sits within the so few, and more of a distribution of that, which kind of might mean that sometimes it's a gifting, sometimes it's it is not, and it's a big question.
I know, I'm aware of that. But thank you for like giving us an introduction of and the start to an answer in regards, and I agree in regards to it will look different for everyone, and there is it doesn't have a clear end goal, and there is just a lot to do, and obviously lots of different anchor points where we can start or where we can go and explore in different directions. And obviously the Forest Garden project is one of the like projects and points where we can start. And do you just want to quickly give a bit of an overview what people can do in the Forest Garden, or what they can experience, and how it's set up, so people know a bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So how it's set up, we work more with the ecological phases. So in that sense, coming back, right, to natural cycles. And so each month we invite in a new inquiry that we then explore. And each month has different turns. So the first week, it's really an engagement with, let's say, the content. That may be an article, that may be an podcast interview, and in whatever way kind of we get stimulated. And then in the second week is where we share with the other guardians about our engagement with that, and how did that land, how did it feel, how did it feel actually when I reflected 3 days later, right? Like it's that process. It's not only necessarily about that first initial kind of response that we have, but really to sit with that, and to be able to openly share, right? Which can also be a vulnerable space, because it might not always be easy, or even something that we would like to feel. And so that's in the second week. So there's where the sharing and discussion can take place. In the third week, we have a community call, and that's where we delve into it some more, and also where there's more of an embodied practice or an embodied approach and integration to that. And then in the fourth week, it's a time of integration. So it's really kind of, okay, we have gone through these first 3 weeks, how does that sit with me? How do I feel? How, some integration, or maybe further exploration into it. And then there's another cycle. So that's kind of how it will work on a month-to-month exploration. And you can join, everyone can join throughout the months. There are several ways that you can be engaging with, that you can become a guardian. So you can become part of the Forest Garden, and where you will have access to the articles, right, and to that kind of initial stimulus.
That's the free part, isn't it? That's like exactly kind of free membership. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so for the curious ones out there, then you can become a member of the Root Garden. And this is where we have that engagement, and where we'll have a community call, which is very much like the focus on the, our personal lives. And then we have the Medicine Garden, which also incorporates the how can we bring this in, how can we bring in our professional aspects, and how can we bring this in, in turn into our workplaces, or places of work, or into our professions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And as I said, I will link the website and the information in the show notes. I feel like we're coming to a close. Is there anything that feels like you want to touch on, or you still want to mention, or anything I missed? Any questions where you feel like I should have asked but I didn't, and you want to respond to them?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so as my last question, where can people find you and learn more about you?
So they can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, and my website. So my handle is Sujeewa Jaya, and that's also my website.com.
Thank you so much, Sujeewa, for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us today. I really appreciate that, and I think it's a great start to go deeper into some of the topics we've touched today. And also, I do want to highly push people into visiting you on your website and on Instagram and following you, because I think you're doing amazing work. Same with the forest garden, but also like with your individual breathworks. And I can just encourage people to attend your breathwork sessions because they are amazing. And I love when you do breathwork sessions because they are always really special. I've got a beautiful way holding space for people. So just want to encourage everyone to go and check out Sujeewa and her work, and maybe attend 1 or 2 sessions of hers or even more.
Thank you. And again, thank you for having me here. It's really been a pleasure. And thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. Und damit sind wir am Ende der heutigen Podcast-Folge angekommen. Ich möchte mich nochmal ganz herzlich bei Sujeewa bedanken für ihre Zeit und ihren tollen Input, ihr Wissen und ihre Weisheit zu all diesen spannenden Themen rund um Breathwork und Kolonialisierung, beziehungsweise die Wichtigkeit der Entkolonialisierung unserer Gesellschaft. Wie am Anfang schon gesagt, ist dieses Gespräch wirklich gedacht als Einstieg und als Startpunkt, um sich individuell noch mehr mit diesem Thema zu beschäftigen. Und wir haben es ja auch gesagt, die individuelle Arbeit beginnt für jeden von uns an einem anderen Punkt, abhängig davon, wo wir herkommen, wer wir sind, was unsere Geschichte auch ist. Und wir hoffen, dass wir dir mit unserem Gespräch einen Anreiz geben konnten, dich tiefer mit dem Thema Entkolonialisierung auseinanderzusetzen und zu beschäftigen und zu schauen, welchen Einfluss dieses Thema auch auf dich und auf uns alle heute hat. Und wie versprochen findest du in den Shownotes die Informationen zu Sujeewa. Sie ist auf Instagram, Facebook, und ich verlinke natürlich auch ihre Webseite, und du findest auch alle Informationen zum Forest Garden Projekt und wie du das im Internet findest. Schau dir das bitte unbedingt an. Also das ist wirklich eine Herzensempfehlung von mir. Ich finde die Arbeit, die Sujeewa und die anderen Gründerinnen des Projekts machen, ganz, ganz wundervoll und wichtig, und würde mich daher sehr freuen, wenn du dir das auch einmal in Ruhe anguckst. Und dann möchte ich noch einmal ganz zum Schluss auf die Breathwork-Ausbildung hinweisen, die jetzt kommende Woche dann tatsächlich startet. Am 8.6. Mittwochabend ist das erste offizielle Seminar. Gestern hatten wir schon das Einführungsseminar, was noch offen war für alle Interessierten auch. Und wir werden uns ab Mittwoch für 8 Monate gemeinsam auf die Reise machen, um tiefgehendes neues Wissen zu sammeln, zu lernen, wie wir als Breathwork- und Atemcoaches andere Menschen mit auf die Reise nehmen können, mit ihrem eigenen Atem sich zu beschäftigen und dadurch vielleicht auch deren Leben zu transformieren. Und wenn du kurzfristig noch dazu kommen möchtest, die Anmeldung ist noch bis zum 8.6., bis kurz vor Seminarbeginn geöffnet. Alle Informationen findest du auf meiner Webseite. Dort findest du auch eine Kursübersicht mit über 30 Seiten, in denen ich die Ausbildung ganz ausführlich vorstelle. Du kannst sie dir runterladen, kannst dann ein kostenloses Kennenlerngespräch mit mir vereinbaren, und dann, wie gesagt, geht es nächste Woche Mittwoch schon los. Also falls du spontan noch den Ruf spürst oder falls du die letzten Tage noch überlegt hast, ob das was für dich ist, melde dich sehr gerne an. Die Türen sind noch geöffnet, und dann freue ich mich, wenn es ab nächster Woche wirklich losgeht und die Reise startet. Wenn du die Inhalte dieser Folge und des Gesprächs mit Sujeewa hilfreich oder inspirierend fandest, würde ich mich natürlich sehr freuen, wenn du sie auch mit anderen Menschen teilst. Entweder indem du die Folge direkt weiterleitest oder indem du sie auf Instagram zum Beispiel in deinen Stories teilst. Und außerdem würde ich mich natürlich wieder sehr freuen, wenn du dir einen Moment Zeit nimmst, den Female Flow Podcast zu abonnieren, falls du das noch nicht gemacht hast, und ihm auf Spotify oder iTunes eine Bewertung zu hinterlassen. So unterstützt du meine Arbeit und hilfst auch anderen Menschen, den Female Flow Podcast ebenfalls zu finden. Und da möchte ich mich jetzt an dieser Stelle wie immer bei dir bedanken für deine Zeit und deine Aufmerksamkeit Und ich freue mich sehr, wenn du beim nächsten Mal auch wieder dabei bist. Ich wünsche dir alles Liebe. Bis dann, deine Svenja.